walking around in some kind of fog. I think we're all in a trance. People are talking in symbols. Everyone's sort of floating through this fog of symbols and unconscious feelings. Here's another person who's existing in a dream, taking us into a dream world.
Hello and welcome back to the Lucid Dreaming Podcast. This is episode 4, and first I want to apologize for the long break I took between being sick and being busy. It seems life has started running faster than I do, but luckily I always catch up eventually. So I'm back, and it's awesome that I get to record another episode. And this episode is going to be about brainwaves. And this is a complicated topic, but I'll try to cover as much as I can that I think is relevant, and I'll also explain why I think it's important to understand it, at least the basics, and understand it a little better and understand how it relates in particular not only to sleep and dreams and lucid dreaming, but to the practice of lucid dreaming and how it can help or might help achieving lucidity, just even by understanding some basic facts about brainwaves during sleep. And you'll see what I mean. For some updates before I dive in to the subject, Kickstarter, as always, is a fine subject, and iWinks and the Aurora has, of course, successfully launched with over 200,000, and it looks promising and exciting, and I can't wait to see what they end up doing with it. And at the same time, another Kickstarter campaign that I didn't talk about yet, that doesn't seem like it's relating to lucid dreaming, but I believe it does, also successfully funded, and that is the OpenBCI project. And that is basically for a personal, open source sort of head mount, in a personal EEG that helps track and measure your brainwaves and report raw brainwave data live, and there's all sorts of ways to interact with it, but that's basically the same way or basis on the same thing of how the Aurora or the DreamNet headbands work. They're based on EEG reading, and they use it to basically detect when you're dreaming and try to give you a signal. But with the OpenBCI, there's a lot more that you can do potentially, and this is very exciting. Of course, I backed that too. I even backed the Muse, which is probably a simpler version of it, slightly more elegant looking, but that was more than a year ago, I believe, almost, and it still hasn't shipped, but it's also looking promising. And that goes into a bio and more particularly neurofeedback, and I'll get to that in a minute. So OpenBCI, I'll put a link in the show notes. Looks very exciting as well, and has a lot of potential as far as I can tell. Another little tidbit, and I'm going to write about it on the blog. I think I'm going to take my time and expand on it, but there has been a great article, and I'll link to it, about lucid dreaming and video games. And there are more studies, and this is not the first one, but a more extensive one, that indicates that hardcore gamers have a higher chance naturally to lucid dream. And there's many reasons to that, but some of them are basically being immersed in this sort of virtual reality, and games are getting more and more immersive. Not only do they look more real as graphics gets better, but between the sound and the soundtrack and the size of the TVs we're watching on, let alone when we start using devices that are more virtual reality, like the Oculus Rift, which are even more immersive from what I hear, not only just the concept itself, but I hear that the technology is really done well. Once those get into the market, I think it's sort of, in a way, it's brain training for awareness and is sort of semi-altered states of consciousness, which you'll see what I mean when I get into the specific brain waves as well. So why am I talking about brain waves, and how does this relate? So obviously the brain, works, and I'm going to call it producing brain waves as a simple way to put it. But the brain functions basically resonate in cycles, and when you're doing different things or different states of consciousness, different modes and times during the day, you're basically producing different brain waves. And I'm going to try not to get into too many details. I'll give numbers and stuff like that. I don't know how much relevant it is, but it's kind of fun to know. So let's take just generic examples from day-to-day life, and they range from sort of gamma and beta waves through alpha, theta, and delta brain waves. So most of the day you're awake, you produce either or both of usually alpha brain waves, which are more relaxed and when you're focused or concentrated, beta waves when you're alert, when you're awake, high beta, which basically is when you're anxious or agitated, when your mind is really start moving fast. And above that is actually gamma, but gamma is one of those strange ones. Gamma seems to be occurring a lot when, I think, sometimes not just feeling of euphoria, but happiness. And it's funny because it's kind of above beta, but it behaves differently, or it correlates to different things in our brain activity. People who exhibit compassion exhibit gamma waves. It's very interesting. And again, there's so much we don't know, and this is a complex issue, and it's so much more nuanced than what I'm going to try to explain. So take it with a grain of salt, and understand that this is just broad strokes and broad concepts, and as far as I know, again, I'm not a neuroscientist, but if I wasn't a coder, I would probably be a neuroscientist. It's a strange passion of mine, and I think it's absolutely fascinating. And I think it's going to be, getting more and more into people's hand, and not just in scientific research or medical research and so on. So let's get back to brainwaves. Alpha, as we said, is more relaxed and concentrated. When you are watching a movie or reading a book, you're probably more in alpha waves. And even when you're really diving into, when you're in a creative mode, or like watching a movie and you forget about yourself, you forget about life, and you're sort of sucked into the movie, that's when you start getting deeper into theta waves. Also, theta is when you start getting into theta when you're sort of drowsing or start falling asleep. And theta, or middle or deep theta, is when you start dreaming, in some cases of sleep cycle. And delta waves is deep dreamless sleep. It correlates deep dreamless sleep when it's a really deep sleep. And the cycles are approximately, I think, 1 to 3 cycles per second for delta, 4 to 7 for theta, 8 to 12 for alpha, 13 to 30 for beta, and 31 to 120 cycles for gamma. Now, when you go to sleep, the various hours of sleep, basically there's a sleep cycle, and it's approximately 90 minutes each cycle. However, not every cycle is identical, and in fact, they're sort of usually, barring some sleeping disorder, there is a progression, and the cycles change from cycle to cycle in a very particular way. And there is different quantities of the different brain waves as the cycles go on. And this is where it starts relating more to not only sleep, but lucid dreaming. So when you start sleeping, you're going from awake, and then you're starting, you're probably tired or relaxed, and you're in alpha, and you start falling asleep, and it goes down into theta, and then to deep sleep into delta, and then back up back into theta, through theta to alpha. I don't believe you reach beta, but I'm not quite sure. And then it goes back down again, and each cycle takes about 90 minutes. Now, the duration in which you're in different state changes on each cycle. So as you sleep longer, as the hours of sleep go on, your theta usually increases, and delta, although delta kind of shrinks towards the end, I believe. Now, REM sleep, when you hear about REM sleep, it is a stage of sleep where, again, usually correlates to theta, and usually correlates to dream, and it refers, obviously REM refers to rapid eye movement, but it doesn't always mean that if you're in REM sleep you are dreaming. So it does correlate for the most part, but it's not one-to-one. It's not synonymous with dreaming, but I'll put it this way. All dreaming, I believe, occurs during REM sleep, but not always during REM sleep you are dreaming. However, again, as the hours go on during sleep, the later it is in the night, the longer your REM segment is, and the more chances you'll be dreaming, and you'll have more dreams or longer dreams during the later hours. And this is important because if you're trying to practice lucid dreaming, then you know that you won't, as you fall asleep, unless you are really, really tired or sleep deprived, or you're falling back asleep at a certain point, then you're probably not going right into REM sleep. And that's important. And if you have one of those practices where you're waking yourself up on purpose to go back to sleep and try to enter a dream, then you might want to do that later in the night and not very early. So there's more chances you'll hit REM sleep. There's more chances there's longer periods of time. It's sort of deeper sleep, and you're more likely to go back into a dream, for example. So let me talk a little more about brainwaves. So this is kind of cool, because what people, I think, don't understand is, and again, the brain and awareness and consciousness is complex, and we don't really understand it all that much. We're learning more and more as we go. But science in particular is starting to dig further into it, because it was always one of those things like our heartbeat that we thought was mostly out of our control. It's a mechanism that runs on its own. The brain, just like the heart, is one of those things that never stop. Even when you're there's no dreams, deep sleep, the brain still has activity. Even if it's minimal activity, it's still activity. But as more and more research started showing up on this, people who had a meditation practice started to get incorporated into these research. And now, I'm not going to go too much into meditation, although I do think it's important, but that's a whole other subject on its own, and maybe I'll do an episode about that further down. And I don't know what your association or correlation is when you hear meditation. Some people think it's it has to do with Eastern religion or Buddhism in particular, or just spirituality. Others know that it's just a very technical internal practice, but something that science for the past 5 or even 10 years or more has really figured is tremendously beneficial to mental and physical health. And the benefits of meditation are starting to pop up more and more and more in science. So that's fantastic, and that's why you're starting to see a lot of these devices coming out, like the OpenBCI or the Muse or the Emotive. And this is why there's a whole field of biofeedback and neurofeedback that is starting to come out for personal use, because people want to sort of take control of not only being aware of their states of mind, but maybe even taking more conscious control over their state of mind, which is exactly what you're doing to a certain degree when you're lucid dreaming. You are becoming consciously aware that you're dreaming, while in usually a state where you're not that consciously aware. I mean, you have the occurrence, it's sort of happening to you, you're dreaming, but you don't even realize that you're dreaming. There's not that level of awareness. And meditators, long-time meditators, not only show more capacity of controlling their states of mind during the day, they also show it during night. So people who meditate on a regular basis are more likely to lucid dream as well. Because what they're actually doing, or at least what is happening in some types of meditation, perhaps not all of them, but some specific types of meditation, is you are, or at least what happens, maybe it's, I don't know if it's the purpose, but maybe it's a sort of side effect of what happens is that you're slowing your brain waves and you're going deeper into alpha and deep theta and even deep delta while still being awake and aware, which, until people started doing research about meditators, they didn't even realize was possible. We don't really exhibit delta waves while being awake. That's a sort of very rare kind of thing. And having the ability to purposefully control and do that yourself is quite remarkable. And again, physiological and psychological and mental benefits are tremendous, but that's even a whole other story. What you're actually doing is you're exhibiting both, and again, I can link to one of my favorite videos, my favorite philosopher, believe it or not, Ken Wilber, who just had a birthday, 65th birthday. Happy birthday, Ken. Ken Wilber has a video where he's basically, he's a longtime meditator, and he's basically connecting a somewhat rudimentary EEG, or at least back then it was, EEG, and showing how, while still being awake, kind of sort of turns off his brain, quote unquote, or still displaying, only delta while being awake, which is quite amazing. And this is sort of the self-control that you can achieve through something like meditation, or through neurofeedback training. Hopefully that's something that we'll be able to achieve as well. And you're basically training your brain and training your conscious ability to stay quote unquote awake or aware even during theta and delta, which happen in, delta is deep sleep and theta is the general brain waves that correlate with REM sleep, which is when dreaming occurs. Another example of what people use or do in order to achieve that is something you may have heard of, binaural beats, and it sounds like one of those things, again, new agey stuff, or sort of technological attempts to get into that, and I won't give my judgment about binaural beats. Technically, what binaural beats are is audio that's played through earphones, and there's a difference between the right side and the left side in terms of frequency, and the difference between them, what sort of causes the brain, it's called entrainment, and what it does, it causes the brain to, a way to put it is, it sort of, it can pull the, it basically entrains the brain to produce a certain brain wave, a certain frequency. The difference is what causes it. So if you start at a certain frequency and you then lower it over time, let's say 30 minutes or an hour, you can basically get your brain, while sitting and awake and listening to this audio, get your brains into deep alpha and then theta and then delta. And people are, promoting it or selling it as, meditate without effort, so to speak. And whether it really does that or not, it does technically work in getting your brain to a deeper brain wave while just sitting and listening to it. What the effects or benefits of that's debatable, and it's not for me to really say. I think a lot more research should be done about that. But that's another example and another method or way to try to get into these states, or train your brain in a certain way to produce these brain waves while still being awake. And that has the theoretical potential of helping induce lucidity if we either can train the brain to do it or find a way to do it while in sleep. Although you don't really need to entrain your brain to get into delta. Just go to sleep. Believe me, it will get into theta and delta. But you see what I mean. There's all these various ways, and there are various technologies like neurofeedback, again, to get the brain to do something that we want. But I believe that training the brain to do it on our own is a much more powerful thing. See where I'm getting at? So this is quite fascinating to me very much, and this is why a lot of people who do sleep research, sort of hook themselves up to EEG and other types of readings. You can read just you can detect just the eye movement in particular, or just muscle tension and other things like that. So eye movement can be detected through an accelerometer or other ways as well. But the brain waves in particular indicate something, and what you actually see on an EEG when someone becomes lucid is that they were exhibiting, let's say, theta waves, theta brain waves, and then they're exhibiting alpha or even gamma waves, while suddenly when they right before and during lucidity in dreams, which indicate, again, these correlate to sort of conscious awareness, and really indicate, this is one of the way that they proved that lucid dreaming is a real thing, together combined with showing the rapid eye movement and kind of predetermining a certain sequence of eyes. So most of you probably know that Stephen LaBerge is famous for scientifically proving that lucid dreaming exists through an experiment where the subjects who were inducing lucidity in a dream had a predetermined sequence of eye movement, like, let's say, left, left, up, left, right, right. And when they are dreaming, they are moving those eyes, and the eye movement correlates to actually what you're doing in the dream, which is kind of amazing. Through showing through the EEG that they're actually asleep and they're actually dreaming and still doing the sequence that was predetermined. That was the proof that they were really conscious and doing this on purpose. And the experiment was repeated. In fact, actually, Keith Hearn, less people know of it because he's less famous for it, but sort of had the same experiment and some proof of concept a couple of years before Stephen LaBerge. They're both sort of it's one of those things where science happens, corresponds in different places by different people. It's one of those effects that occur. So this is something that is worth becoming sort of aware of and thinking about, whether you're doing a sort of regular practice of lucid dreaming, or you're looking into using a device, a headband, or starting to practice either meditation in particular or neurofeedback through just a straightforward EEG device. And I think this is going to get more and more sophisticated, more and more refined, and we'll have basically devices that help us not just induce lucidity for us. I don't think that, I don't know, maybe in the future somebody will come up with a way to just poof, make you a lucid dream. I don't know if there'll ever be a true lucid dreaming pill, but maybe through transcranial stimulation, which is putting electrodes that are sending a current externally from the scalp, through the scalp to the brain, to specific areas in the brain that might trigger something. Although that's a little still in its infancy. This is kind of dangerous territory for now, because again, there's so much about the brain that we don't understand. But things like that might help us. But I believe that neurofeedback will allow us direct correlation, because meditation, the thing about meditation that I find tricky, and I've been meditating for 5 or 6 years now on some regular basis, and has tremendous benefits to lucid dreaming as well as just general life health and all its various aspects. But meditation is something that you don't, at least for a long time or without guidance, you don't really know what's going on still in your mind. You might feel like you're getting into a deep state or even an altered states of consciousness, but you don't really know, and there's no way for you to measure what is going on. Now, with neurofeedback or with an EEG that, let's say displays data either after the fact because it's registering the brain waves, or in front of you on your smartphone screen, it's displaying your current state or your brain waves, very much like what the DreamNet is planning to do. Although of course the idea is to go to sleep with it, but you can actually put the DreamNet band on your head while you're awake and look at your brain waves, which is very, very cool. So this is basic EEG device in a sense with a few electrodes. I think the Muse has 5 electrodes, the Emotive has 6 or 7, OpenBCI, I'm not quite sure, but also probably 7 or even more. There are some medical grade devices that has like a cap on your head with 20 or so or even more electrodes to measure different areas. So again, this is not like one brain wave is one type of thing, and there's a lot of aspects to it. But with something like that, we can basically start, quote unquote, practicing a sort of meditation to, I believe, not only see what is happening in our brain in different states, but to practice a combination of a deep state that correlates to dream, let's say, theta brain waves, something like that, while being awake and while being aware, which is often what happens basically in lucid dreaming. You're cultivating these 2 states of consciousness at the same time. And I believe that once we start doing it very actively, this will increase our ability to more naturally, more easily induce lucidity in dreams. And again, this is a very rudimentary introduction to brainwaves and sleep. Again, remember, this is so much more nuanced, and there's so many other aspects to it. Actually, let me take a couple of detours to talk about things that relate not particularly just to sort of brainwaves, but to sleep and dreaming. There's a lot more that's going on, like change in body temperature, heart rate when you start dreaming or you go into REM sleep. Your heart rate goes up, and brain activity, of course, as well goes up. The brain waves don't necessarily correlate, or there is a correlation, but there is no one-to-one. You can't extrapolate necessarily from brain waves which areas, segments of the brain are active. So obviously, there's many parts of the brain. I'm not going to go into that because that's really a sort of deep dive, which I'm probably not qualified to speak about into specific of details. But there's different areas of the brain that start working. Together with that, there's different physiological things that happen. So, for example, I'm sure many of you know about sleep paralysis. And sleep paralysis is just a very clever function of the body that occurs when you go into this phase of sleep to prevent you from actually moving, because in dreams, you are starting to move around. You imagine that you're walking, that you're running, that you're jumping, kicking, punching, whatever else you might do. And if it wasn't for sleep paralysis, you'll actually physically do these actions, because as far as your brain concerned, you're actually doing all of this. So what the brain does, it shuts down, literally paralyzes the body, and everything except for, let me put it this way, it paralyzes all voluntary muscles, things that you can choose to move, like your hands, your feet, and so on, but keeps going all involuntary muscles and activity, internal organs, and so on. But everything except the eyes. So the eyes, again, the eyes keep moving, and those are the rapid eye movements that correlate to our actual movement in your dream, which is, again, to me is amazing. And a sleep paralysis, when you think about it, one of the sleep disorders, for example, when that process gets a little skewed, is when people sleepwalk and actually get up and move and do things during their dreams. Of course, sleepwalking is something that also happens during the end of delta brainwaves or a deep sleep stage, but that's, again, different story, and there's a lot of nuances, different cases, and different sleep disorders. But other things that are important to know in this sleep cycle, people talk a lot about supplements, and melatonin is an example. Melatonin is something that your brain produces naturally. It's what regulates sleep in a sense. It helps you both fall asleep as well as help you sleep better, and does many other things that I don't understand enough. But it's very crucial for sleep. And what requires for the body to start producing melatonin, people say, oh, let me take melatonin, I'll sleep better, I'll have more vivid dreams and so on. Before you run and take melatonin, or anything for that matter, supplements, natural or otherwise, realize that melatonin is something that your body's supposed to produce on its own. And if it's not producing enough, there's different reasons for it. And it's probably not, most likely not a chemical imbalance. Again, I'm not a doctor and this is not medical advice, but if you think about it, melatonin is produced when it starts getting dark outside. However, we keep the lights on until we go to sleep. We keep staring in bright, colorful screens with lots of light straight into our eyes. And then, many of us are on our phone or tablets or computers or TVs right until we go to sleep. And that's kind of a problem because the brain doesn't start producing melatonin, or not as much, not as easily, until it's dark, which is another reason, by the way, to try to create a sleep condition where it's really, really dark. Like close the blinds, close the windows, turn off lights. As dark as you can, you'll sleep better because your brain will produce more melatonin, or at least the proper amount. That's another reason why, I say before you go and take a supplement like melatonin, you might not want to do that because if the body gets used to an external source of melatonin, then it relaxes its need to produce it on its own more often. So you don't want to get dependent on that or something like that. But if you do things like before you go to sleep, at least 30 minutes or an hour, start turning more lights off, getting the room darker. Maybe instead of watching TV or being on your phone or on your computer, all the way to the minute before you go to sleep, you can take the last 30 minutes to read a book. It's still, an effort to the eyes, but the book doesn't produce lights, straight into your retina. So that's one thing. If you're using a computer, there are programs like Flux, Flux, I'll link it as well, that as the time goes by during the day, it reduces the light on your screen, or more particularly changes the light temperature, and to a temperature that is more conducive to your eyes adjusting to darkness, and it will help you start producing melatonin because it gets dark and it doesn't combat that effect, and you'll fall asleep better. You'll sleep better during the night. So before you take something like melatonin, help your body do it naturally. And go back to doing naturally more properly, and you'll most people I talk to feel the difference once they start making these small changes. So again, all these things that are conducive to better sleep are more likely to produce better and longer dreams, and which in turn is more likely to produce higher chances of achieving lucidity during longer REM cycles later in the night, and you are, again, if you're sleeping better, you're more likely to induce lucidity. So I think that's a good place to stop as any, because I can dive into all these sub-subjects very easily, and you won't get me to shut up. So enjoy it while I'm willing to stop, and I can get into these subjects in further episodes, and if you have particular things you want me to cover or even research, believe me, I'll dive into it happily. So hopefully that helped you or gave you a nice kind of overview about brainwaves, the cycles of sleep, and how they sort of all correlate. And if you want me to talk more about meditation, I can. I know that some people are iffy and some people don't like when lucid dreaming conversations sort of dive into more of the spiritual side or philosophical side. I'll leave that for later. And when I speak about meditation, at least I talk more in the technical term and scientific things that we do know for a fact, and the actual effects on the brain and brain waves and sleep and lucidity. So again, I hope that's helpful and not confusing in any way, but feel free to send me any questions or if you need any clarifications about it. So that's it for this episode, and thank you again for joining me. If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback, you're welcome to contact me at lucidsage.com or find me on Twitter at @TheLucidSage. Thank you, sleep well, and sweet and lucid dreams.